Ajay Thakre, ex-governing council member, IET, Bhatia ji, C. Murli sir, Ravi Kumar, Sarveshwar Rao, and all the dignitaries and participants present for the program. Recently, we have experienced Taukte cyclone in the west coast part of India. The prediction of the cyclone was well before in time, and therefore precautionary measures could be taken in time, and we could save lots of lives and damages. While watching the news, I was just thinking, if the technology for prediction would not have been there, what would have been the damages? So I really congratulate the Hyderabad Center for giving us an opportunity to hear Sri Tata Sudhakar Garu to express or to hear him on the systems for early warning in India. I congratulate the IIT Hyderabad Center for organizing series of webinars on such topics of significance. I am attending the webinar series since last 2-3 weeks and very much impressed and inspired by the way the Hyderabad Center conducting the webinar series and stated and even started such type of webinar series at IET Professional Activity Center at Pravara Rural Engineering College, Loni, Ahmednagar. So thanks for that also for your inspiration to the Hyderabad Center. A proposal regarding new avenues for IET fundraising was presented by me before IET Governing Council. The proposal was initiated with SWOT analysis of IET. We all are well known about the strength of IET, as it is the nationally apex professional body having huge network spread all over India and abroad through various centers, connectivity of technical manpower of over 1 lakh corporate members and engineering students across the nation through IET Students Forum. So that is our strength. But very few might have thought about the weaknesses, threats, and opportunities for IET. Among the weaknesses, I will say few are no direct feasible benefits to the ISF corporate or organizational members, reluctance of staff student from other allied branches to join to become member of IET. And major threats I can just conclude is IET can no longer be dependent on its students base of various courses run by IET, because everyone knows there was a non-recognition of the IET courses and the even scarcity of students for such courses. In such scenario, availability of large quantum of students from large number of technical institutions and unavailability of proper platform for exploring the technical events. Basically, the conduction of technical events are compulsory for every technical institutions, and there is no proper platform for exploring such technical events at national level. So many of the events are organized by various institutes, but at a haphazardous way or just as the family formalities, and may not maintain the quality standard. So IET has there the opportunity. IET also conduct various events at various centers, zonal seminars, NTPC, ATC. But if you look at, there is no linking between one program to the other, various events, and they are conducted independently. So a proposal along with case study regarding new avenues for IET fundraising by creating a competitive environment for research and development through conduction of conferences and publications in journals under the IET banner was presented, and it was well appreciated as mentioned by the madam and conveyed to all the centers for its implementation. This may basically, it's not, it has been conveyed to all the chairperson or during that time it was presented in 2018, and many of the activities in that regard has already been started, but it's not, there is a further scope to implement this proposal to the fullest extent to get the desired result. So the last time I had been the attendee for this program, and Dr. Sudhakar Garu was the chief guest for the program. So he mentioned there that he has developed a platform, digital platform, where the papers from the conferences can be stored, because that is the thing. The thing is that though we are presenting various paper in the various conferences conducted by the various centers independently, and in the zonal seminar or in the ATC2, in the MTS, in NTPC. But once that paper is presented, then that papers are just going unseen. So whatever the Tata Sudhakar Garu has mentioned, so it will be a very good. Even I heard that even Bangalore Center also have developed such type of platform where the this such type the paper publication in the various conference can be saved. But what I look at, there can be a very competitive environment can be generated, so that the more number of students get involved and benefited from this IET. And even we can raise the fund. That can be one of the, so even a case study also had been presented in the governing council, and it was appreciated. So I feel, so if we pursue this proposal, so surely we'll be getting a very much benefit to all the stakeholders related to IET. So I am very much thankful to Hyderabad Center for giving me an opportunity for being a chief guest of the function and to get associated with this program, and to be a part of this webinar series. So really, personally, I like it very much. So I have decided, and even in the beginning itself, I told during discussion that a very good time they have selected, so that we all can get time and spare this time to listen various speakers. Okay, we cannot miss them. So hereafter, I will be, I'm sure that I will be very much interested to attend every program conducted by under this webinar series. So once again, thank you very much, and congratulations to you all for conducting such a webinar series, and particularly congratulations to you for arranging today's seminar on very important topic, that is alarming system, tsunami system warning for the India. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of IET Hyderabad Center, thank you so much for your sparing valuable time, for accepting as a chief guest, and also for your inspiring words about IET. Thank you, sir. Now request our Vice Chairman K. Sitaram Babu Garu to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Tata Sudhakar Garu.
Sir, before I go into the actual reading of the profile of the big personality, Dr. Tata Sudhakar Garu, just 2-3 points. My net is not very stable, sir. I might get lost while I was speaking. I think somebody has to take over from where I have left. That's number one. Number two is I should thank all.
It's okay.
Okay. Big stalwarts.
Okay,
big stalwarts are being part of this webinar, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Number three is I should really thank today's speaker, Tata Sudhakar Garu. Actually, somebody else was supposed to give the webinar today, but so happened that that particular gentleman from DRDO, Scientist G, is affected with COVID, and he has the last minute he could not able to come forward and said that he could not deliver the lecture. So I spoke to him on Monday, immediately has agreed, and he has come with very what do you say, limelight topic of tsunami, because just now the tsunami has happened a couple of days before. I think it gained a significance for it. Now getting back to the actual part of the itinerary, Dr. Sudhakar Garu is basically an MDT in 1982, an IET alumni, and has 38 years experience in oceanographic institutions. He received National Geoscience Award from Ministry of Mines, Government of India, in the category of disaster management for the contributions in the establishment of Indian Tsunami Warning System in 2012. Certificate of Merit from Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India in 2013, and IETE Toshniwal Award during 2017, and also won National Agri Hackathon 2021, very latest. He has contributed to many research programs, both at national and international levels, like Commonwealth Science Council program for Caribbean islands, 5th Indian expedition to Antarctica in 1985, National Day Buoy program, and establishment of calibration and validation system for ISRO, OceanSat satellites, filed 12 patents, 5 technology transfers to industry, and has publications in international journals. In charge of technology transfer cell and incubation facility at NIOT. Presently heading Ocean Electronics Group at NIOT for development of new ocean observation technologies. Chairman of IIT Chennai Center during 2018 and 2020, which he was the contributor for the Best Journal Seminar Award in 2019. Contributed to publications, skill development and members and membership committees for improvements. Developed Horizon, the digital repository for cataloging the IET symposium papers. With this, I invite him for today's program, and Namashya will go through his formalities, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your introduction of today's speaker. Now I request our speaker, Dr. Tata Sudhakar Garu, to start your webinar.
Yeah. Thank you very much for introduction. Chief guest, Dr. Sanjay Gulani, and Hyderabad Center, Dr. Gnaneshwar Rao, and Secretary Namashivaya, Honorable Secretary Sharma, and then the Vice Chair, Dr. Sitaram Babu, and Madam Sandhya, and other executive committee members of IIT. I thank you for inviting me for this webinar. The chief guest actually spoke about the Horizon. I will start with the Horizon. Actually, I developed it and then put it on the Bangalore platform because honestly, I was always telling Chennai Center has a little bit of a resource problem. Now we have our own website. We did not even have our own website. So I put it on that. We haven't started much, but actually I'm looking for 5th June. We have one symposium in Chennai, and we are trying to put the first papers in that. If anyone of you are interested, actually, I'm looking for reviewers. I will put it on a reviewer so that maybe all of us, maybe some of us may be having access to the reviewers, but some of the remote colleges may not be having a good reviewers. So they can use the online reviewers who are actually ready to contribute to that. One thing I've seen is actually there are many of my friends, actually still I have a few years to go for the retirement. One of my friends who are retired, actually they have energetic and wanted to contribute, and they're looking for platform for contributing. I think what we should do is we should actually pull these people and then put it into the loop so that the students who are looking for professionals who have worked in organizations and the professionals who are sitting idle at home, we can actually link up them. I have one plan, actually, put a platform so that we can actually link up these two people. And then we can actually, these students can do remotely also. Now everybody has learned to live with through internet. We can actually get a guidance through the net itself. So the Horizon, this is I covered, and I'll go back to my topic. Yeah, all of you can see it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
This topic is on establishment tsunami early warning system. Actually, I worked for 6-7 years in that. Most of my awards, the Dr. Sitaram Babu's read actually came because of this. It's actually sometimes you'll be lucky in your life to get a good problem to work with, because even though most of us are capable of doing it, we may not get opportunity to work in very good areas. I was lucky, one of the guy. So what happened in 2004, we had a tsunami and 26 December. And because of that, a lot of damage has happened. Normally, we are very good in learning things after the disaster happens. I think we all of us know that whenever there is a cyclone comes, people are moved to the shelters. That system actually started, I think, somewhere in the 70s to 80s, when we had actually, I'm from the Machilipatnam, where we call it Bandar those days, when there was some big, huge cyclone came in 1971, I think, sometime, and then many loss of life was there. After that, the shelter businesses came. So we actually have a habit of learning from our disasters and then trying to create a system. I hope after this corona pandemic comes to some end, we will work on some sort of to improve the rural hospitalization and medical systems. I have one, before I go into my topic, I have one suggestion actually, because honestly, this idea is not mine. There's one chap who I am working with, Vignan Bharati. I'm actually a president of Vignan Bharati, Chennai. So yesterday we were discussing we should actually create some sort of a paper or a note. What should be the health system in the rural? Because it is not practically possible to get a hospital everywhere, but you can have some sort of a system where every person is linked to some sort of a system so that he can get a support when it is required. Now the problem is actually the system is not there, and it is a chaos is there. So I think the IIT, I myself don't have any expertise in medical electronics, but I'm always, last time also I said, we are 25,000 members. Probably somebody will be there who is capable of doing it. I'm ready to contribute with them. And then we can actually create a nice documents for state or central, whatever it is can go. So we'll go back to the topic. What is tsunami? In fact, even though I worked from the oceanography from 82, I never heard about the tsunami till 2004. It's called actually harbor waves, a Japanese word. Why it is Japanese word is, I will go back, I will tell you on subsequent slides. A tsunami is a series of waves, extremely long wavelength, generated by the violent and impulsive undersea disturbances in the ocean. We will see what are the disturbances where it can create. These are earthquake, landslides, volcanic eruptions, and any impact of cosmic bodies. When a tsunami it actually travels at a very high speed. That's the main problem with that actually. It's about 800 to 900 kilometers per hour, and it has a very, very long periods. Both of them are dangerous. I will show you why it is. The present tsunami system actually based on assumption that only because it's not possible to put it for all the events which going to create tsunami, because like cosmic and all, it is impossible to check. But only this system is actually based on the seismic activity. So let us see why this seismic activity happens and how this creates a wave. If you see the Earth, when it started as per the plate tectonic theory, the whole mass of the Earth was together. All the continents were together. And if you see that the continents are actually started moving away from each other, they are moving at different speeds. They move around 2 to 3 centimeters per annum. And why they are moving is, if you see the Earth, this is actually inner core and outer core, and then we have some sort of a lava called mantle. It's if you see any volcanic eruptions, you get the lava. That's a mantle actually. So what happens is this, on that we have it on the top lithosphere. We are actually on that. So because this is a semi-liquid and the Earth is rotating, these plates are actually have some sort of a different movement. So these actually move from each other, and whenever they touch, hit each other, there's going to be a friction generated with that. There are 3 types of movement actually happens with the plates. The normal fault, one plate goes up and one plate comes down. And the slipping fault, they move in the horizontal direction, and thrust fault. So let's see what happens. Of course, there is a fault here, and this is the bathymetry of the ocean. And then either it moves rising or goes below. For both conditions, we generate either wave high or wave low. And then because it's a liquid, it can't stay in that position. So the wave actually travels towards all directions. And then it moves in this velocity. And then when it comes to the closer to the land, actually the intensity increases, because the energy which is actually created in such a big, large volume actually has to get concentrated into a small one. This is how it happens. So if a wave actually few centimeters or 1 meter, about 2004, what has come is actually about a 1 meter tsunami. And then when it comes to actually land, it will be very, very high. but it is not in not all the places. I will show you two examples in that. I made this even to students who understand this. There are two videos. This is actually shot at Kanyakumari Vivekananda Rock. So some people actually, those days, even video cameras are not really popular. So the quality of that this thing is not that great. If you see that actually Vivekananda rock is actually very, very big one. And then the wave actually almost crossing the the wave is actually crossing the wave in the rock. That is because of the bathymetry of the coastal area. And then we will see Maldives. This is as good as any one of the floods we normally see every time in India. So the difference between is basically is the bathymetry of the shelf. If you take Maldives, Maldives as a coral island, it will actually have a steep cut like this. So there is no wave generated. And if you take it Kanyakumari, there is actually a slant bathymetry, so the energy got concentrated and a huge wave is generated. Then we will see where are the possible, when you are looking at actually setting up a warning, we need to see what are the possible places where this is going to happen. Before 2004, not much tsunamis are recorded in the world, and then it is mostly recorded in the Pacific. This is called Pacific Plate. It's called Ring of Fire. And then if you see, this is the Japan, this is America, and then Japan is actually more vulnerable for this because it's very, very close to the major fault. And India, if you see, we have two faults. This is called Sumatra fault, and then this is called Makran fault. It's actually off Pakistan. If you take the history, there are so many tsunamis are recorded. The last one, which is recorded in the Sumatra coast, is 1945, and it is actually quite a big earthquake. And then there are so many earthquakes that happened on the Sumatra belt. If you see, these are the ones which is actually earthquakes happened. But now one thing is that not all the earthquakes will create the tsunami. The earthquake has to be more than 6.5 in magnitude. And then the plate movement should be on top 100 kilometers. Because if it goes below, there will not be any displacement of any mass on the bottom, and then there's no going to be displacement of water. And then, of course, the vertical movement of the seafloor has to be happened. And then rupture has to be a little slower so that actually it generates a wave. What actually happens? This is actually typical satellite picture somebody has taken from the sky. I don't know the location. This is actually happened in 2004. When it happened, actually, is the first wave was actually a low. And when it low in the early morning in Chennai coast, actually, if you see, the water actually has gone down. Because I told you the period is 2 hours. There is no water on the beach for quite long time. So everybody was curious and then walked onto the sea. And then the next wave has come, and then it got inundated most of the coastal places. It's not actually very far. It has come only up to 100-150 meters from the coast. And then the problem is actually when water comes like this, actually it will float a lot of the objects which are not really firmly connected. Then the next wave actually will take all this floating object into the sea. Suppose you are in a car, actually the car will be floating, and then you will go into the sea, and then it is going to be a disaster. So what has happened in 26 December, early morning there is a earthquake, and then the wave got generated. And then this is the wave, it's a modal output, and then it has almost spread across the Indian Ocean basin. If you see in both the Atlantic and Pacific, they're open ocean because their north and south pole are connected. But Indian Ocean is not like that. There's a solid mass on the northern part. So it's almost, if you see, it is a closed place. So it has taken about 48 hours to dampen this energy. This is a very interesting picture. it is a tide gauge in Andaman, and I will tell you subsequent slide what is tide gauge. There is actually, it gives you the water level on the of the ocean, and if you see here at 7:14, there is a shift in the plate. So this is actual datum, and then it has moved to the here, means that actually plate has moved by 1 meter height. So, and at 7:14, it has actually happened, and of course, subsequently, all this black thing what you see is a tsunami signal. And then it has reached Chennai at 9:09:06 and Cochin at 11:12. But Cochin actually is not a direct wave, because if you see the Indian side, actually it's on the other side, this side. So it is actually a reflection from the Maldives, which would have come at after 2 hours. Then what is the distribution of the tsunami in the region? If you take all historical or 20th century thing, what I was mentioning you, most of the tsunamis are actually came in Pacific. If you take it actually in Indian Ocean, there's only just 4% of them. So then why we should spend so much money on putting the warning system? That's how actually the planners will think. On 26 December 2004, we had a earthquake of 9.4. Actually, it is 9.5 revised one, and the death toll was around 2.5 lakh. And then huge energy is released, and the rupture length is 1200 kilometers. This is actually a big thing, because rupture length is basically the length of the plate which has moved on the vertical direction. So it is 1200 kilometers wave has generated. And then, of course, it is not one wave. There are a series of waves out there. Actually, I remember people in Andaman who are working in our regional center, they did not sleep for a week, because they were sleeping outside, because earth was trembling all that week. And then because there's a mass redistribution, because in the end of the day, earth is actually a small ball. Because of redistribution of the mass, the day of the our length of the day is actually reduced by 2.68 microseconds. And then the Andamans and Nicobars are shifted by 1 meter to 5 meters, and the Indian subcontinent has shifted 10 to 15 meters towards the Andamans. So in fact, actually, Andaman Nicobar Islands have come a little closer than what used to be before. So after that, Government of India thought actually we should put up a warning system. Of course, the warning system is not only for the tsunami and storm surges. Dr. Sanjay was talking about the forecasting given by IMD for the recent cyclone. Actually, nowadays IMD forecasting is very, very good, because this cyclone, which was actually hit Gujarat, is really, really funny one. It was first prediction was everybody thought it's going to hit Kerala, but it has moved parallelly to the coast for almost more than 1,000 kilometers and then hit Gujarat. The prediction has to be very, very good, and then it is predicted 4 days before that it is going to hit Gujarat. That's actually a very good prediction. So coming back to the tsunami, so what is the main points we need to observe and do? So we need to have a lot of real-time measurement on earthquakes in 2 tsunami zones, both at Sumatra and Makran coast, using the network of land-based seismic stations, because this is the primary measurement to see whether there is an earthquake has happened. If it has happened, there is a possibility of generating tsunami or not. Then you have a subsequent observations of real-time network of bottom pressure recorders and tide gauges and HF radars, and to monitoring of the coastal stations. I will go through each measurement, how it is done, and how it is helping finally into the warning system. Then developing the numerical models for the tsunami and storm surges with associated data inputs, and generating a coastal inundation maps, and setting up a 24/7 warning center. And capacity building and training, and this is very important, because most of the times what we have problem is we should able to train the stakeholders, and then international connectivity, because that is very important to share the data from each other, so that actually you can fine tune your things. Sorry. Yeah. So what each measurement does it, how it helps. Detection of large earthquake in tsunamic zones, it will actually tell us whether potential of tsunami is there or not, and then we can calculate the travel time of the initial wave. then observe the change in the water level of the bottom with using bottom pressure recorder. It will confirm, we can confirm or deny if there is a really tsunami has happened, because the first seismic only will tell you there's a possibility. And then water pressure recorder will tell us whether it is really there or not. And of course, the modeling will tell you what are the areas to be evacuated and how much is going to be the inundation. And then we have a coastal radars and tide gauges which actually help, may not be helping giving the warning, but they'll be really helpful when doing the subsequent fine-tuning of the models and forecasting. Individually in India, our institutions are very good, but not many times we find everybody is putting up effort to solving one problem. This is one of the good project where they could pull all the resources available in the different part of the institutions. Like seismic stations were done by IMD, all the oceanographic thing like bottom pressure recorder, mood buoys, it is done by NIOT, and coastal radars also, of course, we did it. And then tide gauges are given by Survey of India, and all the communication is done by ISRO. Then there's one 24/7 warning center is actually established in INCOIS in Hyderabad. Actually, present director Dr. Srinivas Kumar is my good friend. Anyone of colleges who wanted to go and see the center, it's actually very beautiful. The war room they have. We can actually see how all these inputs are coming and how they are using it to do a final forecast. So let's see the each inputs. Tides first we will see. Tides are basically sea level changes, happens because of the gravitational pull of all the celestial objects. We have two celestial objects which are very close, moon and sun. And of course, if you take all the planets, it actually, you need a much longer data, but their influence is very less. So then because of that, because moon is very close to us, the tidal cycle is actually going to moon cycle of 28 days cycle. And then if you want a perfect tide of any location, we need to look for moon, sun and moon together for 365 days so that we can get it. So these are the, actually, if you see it, I don't know, maybe it's a little smaller for that. This is the neap and then this is the high tides. What is a little bit of electronics for how these tides are measured? Tides are measured actually, basically, this is a little bit older technique. It's called staining well. You have a staining wells are there, and then water, this is the sea level. And then you have a float which is floating on that. And then it is connected to a weight, and then the whole thing goes through some recorder. Now, of course, physical recorders are not there, it's all digital. And then you actually, with that, you will know what is the height of the sea level. And then, of course, all of us use this in colleges and everywhere, the pressure sensor, which can actually measure the hydrostatic pressure of the water level. And then acoustic, there are people, we use a lot of acoustic methods. This is basically about, I think, 6 or 7 kilohertz acoustic transmitter, which transmits the acoustic signal, which touches the water level and come back. And then you use the sound velocity with the temperature correction to find out what is the actual distance between the sensor and the water level, and then you calibrate it. The best thing what everybody uses today is a radar smart sensor. This actually works about 2.6 gigahertz, and then it transmits a signal and we receive it. We all know how radar works, and it gives a very, very accurate system. So these data is actually collected every 1 minute and transmitted using the satellites. Not only satellites, they are one with GPRS and some of them like a very, very remote, they work on VSATs, and most of them work with actually INSAT, MSS and DRT transponders, where the data is linked to the 24/7 station at INCOIS. There are about 40 odd tide gauge network put across the country, and then of course some in the Lakshadweep and Andaman. And we get a data from all other international stations where the data is collected almost the same format. The next one is a HF radar. HF radars is high frequency radars which work around 8 to 12 megahertz. And then there are they work in a pair. And then India actually about 5 pairs. And then they work in pair. One is transmits and the other one receives it. And then you have a insignificant area of this much place, and then you get basically for currents. Of course, there are HF radars available in the world which can give you actually wave height and wind speeds also. This is what actually I was asking one time Dr. DC Pandey for help whether we can make it in India. This is imported from the actually American. And then these HF radars are actually used for measuring the current for the tsunami part, and then they used for fine-tuning the models in future reference. It's actually a very simple system with the Yagi antennas, both transmitters and receivers, and then we have a dedicated places all along the beaches to keep the systems. And I was telling you, you have a transmitting signal, and then you get a reply, and then you can calculate the currents with the replied signal. The bottom pressure recorders are the main. My contributions actually in bottom pressure recorders to the tsunami system. How they function. They also function the similar way what actually doing in the tide level. But in fact, actually we can call it as a measurement of deep sea tide. There is one pressure sensor actually kept on the bottom of the ocean, and the RF doesn't work in ocean, so we can communicate to the using the acoustic from this bottom, we call it bottom pressure recorder with that surface buoy. And surface buoy is basically some relay system which transmits the signal to the satellite. And these systems are actually installed up to 6,000 meters. Our network is mostly at 4,000 because that's what our depth in both Arabian Sea and Bengal. And it has a 15 centimeter average. I will come to that when talk about the algorithm part. So it works in simple way because it's a little bit meant for the students also. When you put up actually system in the sub bottom, it keeps measuring they are looking for the hydrostatic measure changes. This simulation actually all how it measures the tsunami. So the small earthquake has happened. Because there is a movement of mass, there's going to be wave generation. And then wave actually passes the bottom pressure recorder. That will be, I was telling you, that actually is not very big one. And then of course, when the signal comes, the buoy will transmit to the signal to the satellite, and satellite will send it to the land stations. If you are in the ocean, actually, you will not know there is actually a tsunami come because it's going to be a few centimeters to maximum 1 meter. And then the surface waves always in the ocean actually are much more than that. So you will not know. Only thing is the probably safest place if you have a tsunami is the open ocean. So these are actually a tsunami buoy of the Americans. I was telling you before 2004, nobody had a tsunami. And then we built down 2004 to 2007 and then made operational from, I think, 2007 September. Then we have put about 10 buoys, 2 on the west coast, Makran belt, covering the Makran belt. And then, of course, 10 of them on these 2 are not operational, 8 of them in the east part of the west part of the Andamans and east part of the mainland. This is basically as put such that actually, if you take the fault, it is actually all along the Andaman islands. So this first buoy is called half-an-hour buoy, and second buoy is called 1 hour buoy. Basically, in case any wave is generated here, it will take half an hour to reach here and then 1 hour to reach here. So with this, we can actually tell how much time we have to evacuate the people on the coastline. The measurement is done at the using a pressure sensor. It's a quartz crystal resonator. It actually accuracy is only 0.01. If you go with accuracy, it is practically not possible to measure the small variation which is going to be created. I will show you what the algorithm is used and how the real signal is detected. But it is very, very reliable. And then almost all the tsunami system whoever is developed are using only this. Like I was telling, when the we are looking at hydrostatic measure variations in the ocean, and then there are going to be a lot of waves which are going to be generated at different wavelengths. You have a wind wavelengths which are actually high frequency or low high frequency waves, and then you have a gravity waves or swells, and then you have a tidal currents which actually have 12 hours 25 minutes. So what we have to do is our system has to filter out all these variations to measure the variations which is going to come because of the tsunami. One good thing happens in this actually is sea itself works as a filter, because if you put any sensor actually down below at lambda by 2, it actually filters out anything which is coming less wavelength that. If suppose you keep it 1,000 meters, any wave which is less than actually 500 meters, 2000 meters long, actually it filters out. It cannot create hydrostatic pressure on the sensor. So with that, actually what happens is it actually eliminates all the wind waves. So what we have is only left with a tidal wave, which is actually very, very long. So basically the sensor is tuned to detect variations on the tidal wave. When the tsunami came and we thought of actually installing the system, we are new. Even though we had a Surface Boy, I was working on Data Boy program, and then we are capable of doing anything with the surface electronics. But we never had any expertise in subsurface measurements, especially acoustic measurements, acoustic communication. In fact, I went to NPOL. There's one person, Murali, one scientist has come to help us to do the acoustic communication. But his expertise is only submarine to surface. This is only 300 to 400 meters. We are looking actually for 4,000 meters. So in country itself, we never had any communication expertise. So we had to develop a lot of new things to do that. So what we had done is actually Americans were actually so much having orders, they were not ready to give it all. So what we did is we identified 3 suppliers who are capable of measuring the deep ocean pressure measurements. And then, of course, algorithm was freely available in the this thing. People have paid money to get it from the NOAA. And then we asked them to design 3 systems, each of them. We gave order for 4, only 1 person backed out. And then we evaluated the 3 systems and then taken one of them as our operational system. So when you work with this type of disaster management system, which is actually you will find only once in a year or sometimes once in your lifetime, you see it is happening. How do we test it, whether it is working or not? So because if it deploy it and then it doesn't work, and then it's going to be a disaster. So there has to be many technique developed to see whether it works for this low wave condition or not. I developed a condition how to check it in the lab. There's one patent. Actually, my award has come only because of this, and I have patent on this. We created artificial wave by just what this is actually very simple. We connected this rope onto the crane, and then we lowered it, as if you are and haul it up as if you are creating artificial wave, and we see whether exactly it is triggering in the place or not. And of course, I created a system to do it in the lab. There is the same thing, is 1 meter container. This is a pressure sensor. And then this is the old tsunami signal, which I had. Actually, this is a stepper motor, which is put onto this. And this whole thing moves up and down. So artificially, we are creating a wave on the pressure sensor. And then we can actually check whether the system functions, working is or not. Once you drop the buoy, there is one problem is there because it's a RF, it doesn't work. We need to work on it with acoustic modem. The best acoustic modem available today is actually range of 10 kilometers. So if you are actually your surface buoy is at 4 kilometers above you, and then you have to be very close because if both of them are not very close, what will happen is you don't have a communication between the buoy and the BPR, and then there's every chance that you miss data. This happens. I will show you in the next slide what will happen. So if you see it, because of the waves and currents in the ocean, the buoy is not going to be one place. BPR is released here and then actually goes and sits in this place, and then buoy has dropped here, and then it keep actually moving. All these locations are buoy locations. So even when the buoy in extreme condition, even if it moves, it should not go beyond the BPR acoustic range because of the otherwise we will miss a communication and data gap which is going to be there. So it is very, very tricky how to install a bottom pressure recorder very close to the buoy anchor position. And this is a tsunami detection algorithm actually done by Mafjold in NOAA, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration in America. It's actually a simple new algorithm, which actually we give it pressure values, and then it actually predicts the next value. I'll show you how it functions. When you we take actually every 15 seconds a data set, and then you put it in, and then initially when you drop the buoy, first 300 measurements are taken as a null zero measurements, and then that is fitted into the this formula, and then at 3 hours 15 seconds data is actually predicted, and then the predicted data and the observed data is the difference is taken, and if it is, both of them are actually have any difference, then it is actually taken as a tsunami. Sorry. This simple picture tells you how the algorithm works. This is the tidal wave, and then we installed just about 3 centimeters of 30 mm or 3 centimeters of small wave on this thing. And then we are actually continuously looking for the difference between the observed data and the measured data. When both of them are actually first 3 hours, of course, we don't actually do the measurement. After 3 hours, we start checking it up. And then whenever there is a variation is there, then you get a kick of this, because the prediction actually using this algorithm is very good. So the prediction and if there is no abnormality on the data, or in no tsunami is generated, it is going to be a 0. And then if it is actually any even 1 centimeter, even actually few mm's also we can detect it. I will show you that some of the experiments I had done at the last. And then we can actually detect any coming wave, and that is taken as a alarm, and then the data is transmitted to the tsunami center. Once you put up the buoy in the ocean, this actually is done in 2006, the first buoy, and then we had a nearby buoy of the Americans. We checked the data and then found it. Our data is also equally good, is equal to the tsunami buoy data generated by the Americans. And this is how the Indian system looks. This is the, sorry, this. Yeah, this is the Indian surface bottom sensor, and then buoy, and both of them are connected. And then we are using the INSAT and IMASAT satellites to transmit the data. And then it is deployed around 3,370 meters of water depth. A little bit of electronics part, how the predictor part works. This is the predictor. And then you have a sensor, which actually quad sensor, which is continuously measuring the outputting the data. And then the predictor actually predicts the difference between these two. And then if it is any difference, it actually gives you the communication module, which actually sends data into the acoustic modem, which is on the surface buoy. And of course, there is one tilt sensor also along with the bottom pressure recorder, because tilt sensor you need, because when you're actually putting on 4,000 meters, today we don't really have any great tools to exactly put it on the bottom. So we just actually, about 400-500 meters above that, we just release it. There's every possibility sometimes it will not sit properly. If it's not sitting properly, then your acoustic modem will not be looking at your buoy. So what we do is we'll recover using the acoustic relays, and then we put it back again. Then we come to the surface system. Surface system, you have an acoustic modem which receives from the surface buoy, sub-bottom buoy, and then you have a hardware which actually sends the signals through INSAT and IMASAT modems to the satellites. What are the challenges we have in instrumentation in the oceanography? Actually, it's a very, very complex. Sometimes we say actually we have more difficulty than making this equipment for this space, because we have to worry about a lot of pressure. We work about, if you're working at 6,000 meters, we have to worry about the casing which can survive at 20,000 PSI. And then its humidity is very, very high, because we are working on ships and coastal where the humidity is normally very, very high. And then with the humid air into any containers, and if you put it in the subsurface where the temperatures is going to go down to very, very low level, surface temperature will be around 28 degrees centigrade, but of the water. But when it goes to the 4,000 meters, it will be 3 to 4 degrees centigrade. So there is every chance that the condensation will happen. If the conditions happen, we all know what will happen to the electronics. So we do a nitrogen purging. We remove the actually oxygen from the container so that this condensation does not happen. Then you have a seawater is a saline, and it is corrosion prone. So we need to use a material which actually can survive. But not all the materials which we know can survive. We have a lot of marine materials like titaniums, SS316 stainless steel, and marine grade aluminum. Those only can survive for a long deployment. And then you have a funny problem of biofouling. Biofouling is basically if you drop it anything into the ocean, actually a lot of small creature will come and touch it, come attached to that. So the growth will go and the shells will come around it. So then what happens is sometimes if you have any optical sensors, because of bifouling, the accuracies will actually change. And then of course the challenges is that it is very, very dynamic media. You need a ship to go there and to do it, and accessibility is very, very poor. So we actually assemble all the systems and we go on ships. I could have spent around 1100 to 1200 days of my life on the ship. So it's about 3 to 4 years on ships. And then we assemble everything on the deck. We have a huge deck with a lot of big cranes and U-frames to deploy this stuff. This is how it is deployed into the water. And then once you drop the buoy, you have to anchor it. So we will actually create a lot of different ropes, different depths we use it. I will come to that, how these things are there. And then it will anchor into a position. And then everything what we put on the ocean, we need to take it out and then service it sometimes. So we use a Gemini craft to go into that and hook onto that and lift it up. I myself have gone and sat on this buoy many times. Then you recover it and then service it every year. So if you put a buoy, actually the anchoring is like this. We call it a S-mooring. There will be a lot of fishing activity. Fishers are going to be there and last top 600 to 700 meters. So what we use is actually we use a combination rope. It's a metal and fiber. And then after you have a nylon and polypropylene ropes, which is attached to the weight. And then it is this anchor position. And then because of this slag, actually the buoy can move into all these directions. This is a team which actually installed it. If you can identify, I'm here. But whatever you put into the ocean is not safe. Fishermen knowingly, unknowingly, actually they damage the buoys. So what happened when you put a system? Actually, you need to have. You should be lucky that any tsunami happens, and then you can find that system is functioning. When I was actually sailing on September 2007 to install some buoys in the southern Arabian Bay of Bengal, somewhere here, tsunami has come actually and at this position. This is the data how tsunami did. This is actually when the seismic event happens. Seismic events actually creates 3 major waves. It's called P wave, S waves, and Rayleigh waves. There are so many other waves also come. P wave actually travels very, very fast, like about 2000 kilometers per second. So you receive wherever you are on Earth, actually you receive the signal very, very fast. And then Rayleigh waves basically what the vibrations what we actually see when there is an earthquake. These are the vibrations of the water pressure recorder when it actually moved up and down. And this is the tsunami wave. On that day, on the 4 buoys, actually we installed, 3 of them have actually picked up the tsunami. See this. So what has happened on that day? If you see, actually these are the tides data from different parts of the world. If you take Chennai, actually you can see about 11 centimeters of wave has come at the harbor. 11 centimeters is very small. So they are given a warning and withdrawn. I will show you the process, how the warnings are issued. And then it is a different places when this wave actually has gone. Then the third part actually is a modeling. Now for modeling, basically we need to do, we know actually we are doing the actually generation of the, using the seismic data. We need to look for the fault area, angle of strike, and depth of the fracture, and dislocation, moment of magnitude of the earthquake. And then next we look at the propagation. To do the propagation, we have to look at the bathymetry of the region. and earth curvature and Coriolis forces and other parameters such as currents and tides. Currents and tides are required because whatever wave is coming, actually the currents are opposite, the effect will come down. So, and tides also same, it's a high tide and low tide, whether if it is high tide and the same time if you have a tsunami, actually the force is going to be double. And then for what we're using this model, actually we need to do the run-up and inundation maps. This is further we need a nearshore bathymetry, land topography, and other stuff. So with this, actually we are creating a vulnerable map. This is actually one of the map for the Kutch. If you see the lines, the red line actually shows if there is a high tide line is there. If a tsunami comes, one scenario, I'll tell you what is mean the scenario and how much the water level will go. This is the and then this, if it is a low water, this is going to be the pipe. What they have done actually is, it is not possible to run a model based on the parameters which are just got generated because of the seismic signal, because the modeling will take long time, and then we may not have a time to actually do the forecasting. So what they did is they created a different scenarios for each cyclonic seismic zone. If it actually 10 centimeter wave comes, what happens? 20 centimeter wave comes, what happens? 30 centimeter wave comes, like that for different zones. They calculated thousands of scenarios are created, and a lookup table is created. And then based on the seismic activity, what we have received for this station, we pick up the lookup table and say, okay, this is going to be the possible scenario I need to use for forecasting. So you have actually plotted a lot of vulnerable area. There is something called tsunami N2 model was used, and then you map all the coastal areas depending upon what type of this thing it is. Then we come to almost the last part of my presentation, Tsunami Early Warning Center. We have seen the seismic data and BPR network and tide gauges. All of them will transfer data to the earth station. And then this data actually using the model data, we are actually putting onto the for the forecasting. And then this is how the pictures in the INCOIS looks like. This is the network of the seismic stations in India and the seismic stations across the world. That's why the international connectivity is very, very important. We can get the data from all others so that we can actually see whether data we can actually good. Today, the fastest prediction what we have is 4.5 minutes. So after 4.5 minutes of any event, we will know whether tsunami will come or not. Then the tide gauges data, and data actually on a real time it is put on a picture on the war room. And then this is how the NT model. This is the scenarios what we have for these different seismic 6.5 to 9.5, and then depth of 10 to 100 kilometers, and of course in the all along the ruptures. This is shown. So if you go back to INCOIS site and then you see it, they will give you the pictures like this. So depending upon your location, you can actually see what is going to be the time the wave is going to come to my position. In fact, actually, we can actually subscribe to them, and then they will actually send you a mail. What is your because everything is automated. This is how the warning center. You have a huge screens where the data is plotted, and then we have a 24/7 people monitoring it. And actually, they have 100 petacycles supercomputer do the back end work. For every disaster, we need a SOP. SOP is very, very important. So when the earthquake happens, actually they will look for first parameter whether 6.5 magnitude is there or not, and if it is less than 100 kilometers, then they know that there's a chances of happening, and then they issue based on the seismic data one alert, and then they are looking for the water pressure recorder data. If the water pressure record is either it is a small or not there, then they will withdraw everything. In case it is there, I withdraw everything. In case it is there, then actually they will look for the, will go to the warning or alert and watch. I will tell you how they are looking at. These are the four things they will actually issue. Warning means the public should be advised to move inland towards the higher places. Alert is the public should be advised avoiding beaches. And then all the vessels which are there anchored in the harbor actually should be moving towards the open ocean. Watch is there is no immediate action required. And threat past means actually there is no tsunami is going to happen. It's a threat past actually. You can say everybody actually can relax. So how this data is disseminated? Now, of course, there are so many options. People use fax, emails, and it actually goes to Ministry of Health Sciences and Ministry of Home. One good thing has happened after the tsunami is actually we have created one force called NDRF, National Disaster Response Force. It has come after 2004 tsunami. Of course, it's originally started for tsunami, but they do now all the disasters. Even if it's a cyclone, we will say an NDRF team has come. So many teams are coming to this area. And then even if there is earthquake, a building collapse, you have expertise. There actually is a force which is drawn from a lot of many places, expertise, and they have a lot of equipment to deal with disaster. That's one of the good things actually happened after the 2004 tsunami is NDRF. So the data is disseminated to all the people, including the public, onto the media and emails. So this is what I'm telling. The bulletins you can subscribe. You can go to INCOI's site and then they will actually mail you this data. And then depending on the place where you're staying, you can see actually what is your status and what is going to be the maximum beach which is going to be there. A lot of capacity building needs to be done, and we need to educate the people and then train them, because this disaster management is done normally by collectors and people who would keep changing this. So we need to actually regularly do this capacity building so that whenever there is a real disaster, we will have people to attend to it. There is one exercise done. Anyone of the students actually, this now it is much easier of course to do. Basically, whenever there is a tsunami comes, we know what are the vulnerable areas. Actually, we can send a SMS or something when a call to all the people, mobile phone people who are there in that area, to ask them to vacate. Instead of actually they looking at this thing, we can actually send on some sort of SMS alert to people to move away from that. This one exercise actually is done in one of the village. So this is what mine is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your detailed webinar, clearly with various effects in tsunami and how it is affecting and everything. And now I request our participants, if you're having any doubts, please, queries, you can rise.
Sir, good morning. I am Anupam Tiwari. I just miss out how you distinguish between the normal high tide or tsunami wave.
See, at the coast, we don't have any bottom pressure recorders. Bottom pressure recorders are actually in the deep sea, actually, which filters out all the unwanted signals. I call them unwanted because the waves which are generated between the winds and swell, and it is actually tuned to the tidal wave. So then because it is tuned to the tidal wave, it actually looking for anything other than the tidal wave in that bandwidth and the frequency band. So there is going to be only tsunamis left. So it is come. At the coast, tides actually, we all know when the tide is going to come. It's actually the phenomena which is continuously there, except when there is a cyclone comes. There is something called storm surge forecasting. Storm surge forecasting, that is depending upon the that is depending upon when the wave actually winds which actually push the water onto the land. Then you have these surges. So that also actually a lot of models are there to predict how much is going to be the surge.
I also have one question. I also have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
You told that fouling, no, sir. That fouling, this system, before putting in actual use, we have to go through the environmental testing, no, sir. So how do we do the fouling testing, sir?
Fouling is actually God-given, madam. We cannot do anything. They go through all the environmental testing, what all as far as electronic instrumentation people, we are seeing their vibration, vibration, salt test, and then temperature cycles. It goes through everything. But
Yeah,
fouling is basically nothing can be done. Actually, there's some technology is there where you can put paints on this with the copper actually. So normally copper actually is not a surface where this biofouling grows. So normally we give a copper shield around it. But some places even it is not possible because that copper shielding will actually affect the measurement. So the one of the other options we use actually is some sort of a brushes with a small stepper motors. So whenever you are doing the measurement, before that actually you run the brushes and then clean the surface and then take the measurement. Of course, most of them are automated. So that's the only thing actually still now is possible. But fouling cannot be avoided, especially places like Goa and all. They are very rich in nutrients. So if you put any optical sensor in Goa, after 20 days, the measurement is not valid because the calibration goes.
So is it continuously we have to keep, like you're telling, optical cameras or maybe optical sensor, continuously we have to clean them, something like that, sir?
Yes.
Maybe calibrate them.
Yeah. See, there's something called, of course, this tsunami thing doesn't have any optical sensor. It's actually a pressure measurements, and it is also in the sub-bottom. So their oxygen levels are very low, so you don't have much corrosion and biofouling. But when you are doing optical sensors are basically used for the chlorophyll, turbidity, nutrients measurements in oceanography. These are very, very minute measurements because you need very accurate sensors to do that. So when you're doing the measurements at tiny levels, if your calibration goes, it's actually your measurements are wrong. So you don't have an option other than taking it out and cleaning it, or you need to have some sort of a copper mesh around it with the compromised measurements, or these brushes to clean it. Otherwise, no choice till today. There people have come out with the gels, paints. There are so many options came, but there is no full method till so far.
Yes, sir. And sir, moreover, somewhere you have shown that we have to actually put these things in seabed also, sir. Are we, till what depth we are able to reach, sir, in that seabed? I am ignorant about that, sir. Actually.
Yeah. I worked up to 6,000 meters. Okay. Americans actually Indian Ocean has a 5,300 or something like that. I worked and actually I was lucky enough. Actually, I almost sailed in all the oceans, Atlantic and Pacific. Pacific is actually at much deeper depths, these systems I can go up to any depth practically because basically you have to take care of the pressure measurements. In India, if you take it, Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, which are on our side, they're about 4,000 meters, and if you go to Indian Ocean, they are 5,200 to 5,500 meters. I worked in all these areas. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Actually, that was a very new thing for me. That's why I attended your lecture today. See the subject. Actually, I have also worked with that underwater vehicles, that underwater automatic vehicles. We are working into that. So I was thinking that if sometime we can get these opportunity to see these test beds or maybe sea beds or maybe things there. I can imagine so many things. So many research work is going on now on the seabed, sir. So this is a totally new thing.
Where you work, ma'am?
No, I work in DRDO, sir.
DRDO, okay. See, we have one project. Actually, setting 3 people in subsurface into the bottom up to 5,000 meters. It's actually we have actually polymetallic nodule project, which we have a area about 50,000 square kilometers of nodules, which of course they're manganese nodules, but manganese is not really important for us. Nickel and cobalt is actually very important for India. For mining those areas. We call the project as Samudrayan, where we are developing a crew module and then vehicle, which can take 3 people up to down below up to 6,000 meters. If you haven't actually come this side, you can see it. Probably we will do first test in few 100 meters next year. And then, of course, 24, I think, 23 or 24, I think we probably will go to the deep sea.
So best of luck for your work, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice work, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually it is not a question. Actually, I had a fortunate to visit Andamans and stay in NIOT, courtesy Dr. Tata Sudhakar, and actually we both with families we were supposed to go on a visit, but in the last moment, Dr. Tata has to withdraw his trip, so I proceeded and I stayed there for 5-6 days, and during that time I experienced a safe tsunami. You can throw some light on that.
Yeah, it has come. I think 2012. I think it is. Okay, yeah. That's actually a very small tsunami. One big problem what we have in the whole warning center is it is basically meant for the mainland because the fault is so close to Andamans. It is very difficult to create any the warning system to the Andamans. Of course, Japanese have created. They have billions of dollars who are put on as optical cables, which are actually measuring continuously. So our system is actually looking to the mainland first. So I think that time there is a small earthquake happens somewhere south of Nicobar. And then what we do is whenever there is a seismic event, first thing for Andaman is always a warning. Because we don't have much work that Andaman is given a warning so that everybody is ready to go into the higher places. Because Andaman basically a hilly region, it doesn't take much time to go to little bit higher sites. And then based on the data, we actually tell whether how big is going to be the wave. And then, of course, for the mainland, there is a lot of. Today, we have one of the best warning center in the world, so we can actually predict very accurately.
Tata Sudhakar sir.
Yeah.
See this underwater deep investigation and observation. Is it? I think there is a requirement for saturation diving kind of technology for the divers to reach the depths. There are so many fiction movies I have seen. I think such things. Are you into that?
Yeah. Actually, divers, I think they are capable of going up to 40 meters without any pressurized suit. Okay. And beyond that, I think human body cannot take it. So we need a pressurized suits. People actually, there is a different class of ships are available, which are called actually diving ships. What they do is actually they have some sort of a high pressure chamber. Okay. So they sit in that acclimatizing bell for 3-4 days before going down, and slowly the bell is lowered into the bottom, where they have to do work especially for the soil rigs. And then they go down into the ocean and then slowly do the work and then come back to the bell again. And it's a small, small capsule like what you see in the space capsule like thing. And then they come back to the bell and they lift the bell and again they decompress, they bring it back to the normal pressure and then do it. So actually it is very tough on the human body. That's why most of the people actually, they don't survive for very long. They are deeply diverse. Very, very difficult for them. And they don't work for very long. They work only for shorter duration. They take a lot of breaks. Yeah.
Correct. In fact, when I was working in Emirates, I used to be on the deck, and these saturation divers used to go down and do technical work, installation and welding kind of.
But today, one good thing is actually most of the things are done by robots now. Because the technology has gone up so much, human requirement is coming down slowly. Yeah.
Right.
Hello, Sudhakar ji.
Sanjay ji,
Yeah. So it is very well explained that the early system for the tsunami. So most of the cyclones that happens in the coastal area, So does it help in prediction of cyclone too?
Yeah. Actually, the total system is meant for cyclone and storm surges together. Okay. Sorry, tsunami and storm surges. Actually, there are small differences there. Tsunami warning is done by we in our ministry. We have two wings. One is done for the atmospheric, other for the oceans. Okay, ocean group is INCOIS, NIOT, and of course the CMLRI and Goa Antarctic Study Center. 4 of us are there. And then atmospheric is IITM Pune, NCMRWF, and IMD. Okay, MCMRWF and IMD, IITM, they actually generate models for the IMD. IMD does the measurements and runs the models and gives you the forecast. These are actually very net, and all the data comes to INCOIS for going together for all. And then coming back to your question, today cyclones prediction is gone up very well, especially after putting the Doppler radars. Our prediction has become very good, and because we used to see actually some 15 years back, they say cyclone will hit Chennai and then it used to go to Bangladesh. We have a joke actually, Chennai to Bangladesh. It used every day. It used to say first Chennai, then Visakhapatnam, then they say it's actually Orissa, and then finally it used to go to Bangladesh. But now what you had seen in the West Coast, 4 days before it was told to you it is going to come to Gujarat, and it has come and hit Gujarat on the same day. That good it is now. And then in the tropical cyclones are actually very complex in nature to do the prediction. If Americans can do it because they're in much longer latitudes. On the top, it is much easy because normally these cyclones form at the equators. They're more complex. And then they slowly move towards the north. Okay. So after some time, it actually becomes easy to predict their directions, because that's the reason Americans and Japanese, they predict very well compared to us. But I think even though we are in a tropic region, I think our knowledge has improved at great length.
Yeah, models.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
models.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes.
Yeah. See, now this all your sensors are at the bottom of the sea floor, at the seabed there, and perhaps you may have to embed inside the bed also if you want to detect the proper seismic level, because they are very, very sensitive sensors. So it needs even power supply. So you may be using some batteries and all those things that needs to be continuously replaced and all those things. How you are managing, because that is lowered almost some 6,000 meters, and the sensitivity. I have got two questions. One is the sensitivity distinguished between the tsunami and seismic that you have already told, but I would like to understand more.
Yeah, the battery actually we calculate for two years. Okay. It's like what you said is correct. We use a captive battery sets. Actually, we're lucky. When I started, I was using alkaline cells, and then which actually you need to have a huge battery. Now the lithium is actually very high density, so the requirement has much come down. We normally do 2 to 4 years because the shelf life is also very good. And then most of the underwater electronics actually is very, very low powered systems. So it actually survives for 2 years. Like what you said, the whole system actually sits on the bottom. It doesn't actually go under penetrated. It has a weight. It's about a water pressure recorder actually has about 200 kg of weight, and then a buoy anchor is around I think 1 ton, 1.2 tons. Okay. But buoy anchor normally actually is what you use in a ship anchor. Once you bought the bottom, it's a sediment. It get penetrated and then get locked in. So if you take it for both of them at certain height, we actually have acoustic releases. So they actually, what they do is they release the anchor and they come up. And you see the floats which are connected onto that, they actually positive point. Whole system will be a positive point if you can release the weight. So what acoustic releases does is once you give a command, they release the bottom. One small hook will be there. It will release the hook, and then because of the buoyancy, slowly will come up to the surface. So therefore, we actually recover only the electronics part, and then anchor and other parts are actually they remain in the bottom. So for every cycle, whenever you're doing the servicing, you have to release the weight, anchor, and then bring the system up and then do the servicing part. This cycle goes on.
Okay, sir. But generally for seismic, they embed this sensor inside the.
Actually, the bottom pressure recorder does not have a seismic sensors at all.
Okay, it's only pressure.
It is only pressure. But what happens in the seismic? There are three signals in seismic: P, S, and Rayleigh. Okay. P and S are actually subsurface signals, which actually reaches your warning center much faster, and then that's how they actually warning center it doesn't reach; it reaches the seismic stations which are on the land actually. Okay, and then from there the data is uplinked. It is. There's something called Rayleigh wave is actually a vibration. What you actually experience that actually travels much slower. What I've shown you in the graph is the Rayleigh wave, where actually because your sensor is sitting on the bottom and the bottom itself is moving. So when the bottom moves, actually you find that vibrations, and then these sensors are so sensitive that the sensor will take some time to settle down. So that's why we see that vibration. It could be there for some time, and then it will come down after some time. Yeah.
That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your patient clarifying all the doubts. Now I request our Vice Chairman, A.K. Sangamkar, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. It was a very nice lecture by Tata Sudhakar, and it's a quite interesting topic. And as you said, before 2004, hardly we were knowing what is tsunami in India. And thereafter, so much progress has been done. And you were one of the major participants in whatever development happened in the early warning system. Today, we keep hearing in the news that tsunami is coming and all the precautions are taken in the coastal areas. All the people will be sticking to the TVs and radios and listening to what is happening and all those things. Recently, last week also, we were all worried because of the cyclone that has come. And we are today, a lot of distinguished people have participated in this webinar that include Kishan Rao and Murli, distinguished fellow, Ramesh, who is your colleague also, who is your friend perhaps, Sarveshwar Rao, Ravi Kumar, all people have joined, and also thank our Vice Chairman Sitaram Babu, who is actively involved in conducting all these webinars every Sunday. As you know, he is very punctual in this. He doesn't give up so easily, and we know that we were thinking that how these things will go, but he is a very good taskmaster. He ensures that everything will go in time as per the schedule. And also I thank our IIT Hyderabad chapter chairman Ganesh Rao Garu, Sandhya, Kirtilata, and other executive council members. So it was a quite interesting lecture, sir. I request all of you to again join again in the next Sunday for the similar webinar. It's quite knowledgeable. It has become. We are learning every Sunday something new. Thank you, sir. Thank you for all.
Yeah. Thank you all. Your patient listening.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, Sudhakar ji, thank you.
Our zonal mentor DC Pandey ji, I think is.
I am Gudeshakar Reddy, sir. I thank you, sir. Gudeshakar Reddy Garu. I will give your name here.
Sangamkar, sir, our zonal mentor is also there, of course.
Dr. DC Pandey.
He is a very senior man. Zonal mentor ji. Zonal mentor South.
Pleasure to attend this fantastic program. I'm really enjoying it.
Yes, sir. Special thanks to for participating in Hyderabad program. As a zonal mentor.
It is outstanding, and this is the first time because it's the IT, involvement. I'm saying the first time this particular program is happening such a meticulous way. And Mr. Gyaneshwar, I will write the letter accordingly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, Namaste, Kishan Rao garu. Our senior most member of IT, Kishan Rao ji has come. Very nice.
Namaskar, Pandey sir. Namaskar.
Namaste, Satyanandan ji.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Congratulations, Ganeshwar garu. The lecture is like a tsunami.
Yeah. Thank you. Doctor is there to take care of. I don't think we have any problem. Tsunami.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sir, if possible, you give it to younger generation. Particularly tourism people must know this. You know this of the whole tsunami and all that.
Actually, we in our ministry actually we promote. We actually wanted everybody to know because ocean is not much known. Space actually is very known, but the ocean is not much known. So whenever we get opportunity, actually we do a little bit of marketing of our institutions. Yeah, so.
Because of this pandemic and the lockdown, we can go to rooftop and see the space, but for the seashore and other things,
Very interesting. Very interesting topic. Very interesting.
Sir, I also wish we have a very good number of what you call competitors for the council election. I wish all of you to get through because I wish that we should have more representation from particularly South. The good olden days, if you see from how many people from Hyderabad, how many from Tamil Nadu, how many from Bangalore, and how many from Kerala, our number was highest from 15 years before. So let us keep up the tradition.
Thank
All
you,
the
sir.
best
Yeah.
to all of you.
Thank you.
Namaskar, Bhatia Saab. Namaskar, Bhatia Saab. How are you?
Fine.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you.
Right, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all once again.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Tataji, it was very nice.
Thank you and good day.
I think you can also use combine the radar technology for that way, basically taking the use of Doppler measurements and other things for the sensors and other things and build certain amount of dependency in the sensing at the bottom.
Yeah, I can give one lecture on that if you want after some time,
Yeah.
not tomorrow, next time. Because ocean sensors are totally different ball game actually compared to the other areas. So we can actually, I can give one lecture on that.
And maybe just we can also think about because everything radiates. Maybe some vibrations and some radiations may be available even at the bottom of the sea, which can be exploited as a passive sort of equivalent of radar technology or sonar technology or something like that. Maybe that may be the sensors in that domain may help measure redundancy.
Yeah.
And then do a lot of processing.
See, the problem with the ocean technology is if you say what is there on Moon or Mars, probably we know better than what is there in the oceans because we cannot map them easily. There's not much ocean is explored. We hardly know what is there in ocean. It can give a lot of good surprises every time. But that's all because of a lot of gap in technology still.
But one thing is also there as we go deep and deep in the ocean, things are not that much moving. Okay, it is just